Well, hello everyone. As usual, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you are. And welcome to this webinar looking at smarter fertilizer use. What does that look like in today's vineyards? I'm Peter Stanbury. I'm Research Director of the Sustainable Wine Roundtable, and I'm joined today by the wonderful Irma Remigio, who's the Sustainability Coordinator from Domaine Bousquet over there in Argentina. And I think it's just about good afternoon to you, because I think it's just gone midday for you. And then also by Ben Brown, who's the COO of InsectBiotech, who comes to us from Valencia. So a reasonably international panel today. Um, and what we're going to look at is the results of a piece of research that we as SWR, alongside Insect Biotech, did a number of months ago, looking really at fertilizer use, but also to use that as a sort of test bed for what more we might do as an organization to help share best practice around sustainable viticulture globally. Okay, so the work was based on a questionnaire that was sent to a number of our producer side members, and then some in-depth interviews were conducted on the back of that with a smaller number of those who responded, and then all of that data was brought together to identify key outputs. And as with all these things, we wanted to try and keep what we were asking relatively straightforward. A, because it makes it more likely you're going to get comparability of data, and also because, frankly, people like Irma are very busy, and so therefore borrowing too much of their time is not conducive. So what we were looking at was how is the use of chemicals and other inputs managed within a wider approach to sustainability. So how does fertilization and other forms of chemical input sit alongside a wider sustainability plan? What are seen as being the current priorities? I mean, the challenge often with sustainability is that there's a lot of things that could be done. So, what are seen as being the key priorities? Then dig down a bit more at the moment to sort of what fertilizers are currently being used, but also what alternatives are being looked at, being explored. And also, as a sideline, obviously the main focus on fertilizers, but also look to some extent at other chemical use as well. And as well as what we hope was being a useful piece of work in and of itself, from our perspective, it was a useful way of exploring how we could develop a role for SWR as a means of exchange around data and insights on sustainable viticulture. Some of you may recall that last year we launched the Sustainable Viticulture Protocol, which is a sort of sixth principle approach to reduction of chemical use in the vineyard, and we've been exploring how we can make that work in practice. So I'll come back to that a little bit in a moment, but what we got from this was some ideas around that. Um, so of all the things, what seemed to be the key priorities that came out from all the interviews and all the questionnaires we did? I mean, really, what was really notable is a real desire to reduce chemical use. Now, okay, to some extent, because the people we were speaking to are members of Sustainable Wine Roundtable, they're probably a cohort who are more likely to be looking to reduce chemical use than perhaps the generality. But nonetheless, it was clear that from all those that we spoke to, that it was a central priority. Okay, part of that actually was cost, and obviously, as we know, over the last few years, and particularly in light of the various wars that are going around the place, fert prices are very high. So um, a cost implication, but I think also a recognition that actually continuing to put lots and lots of synthetic chemicals on vineyards is not a good thing to do. And we were talking before we started about that as growing conditions become more challenging, that sort of marginality goes, and I think that really is focusing people's attention on what they're doing. Another key issue is water management. Now, obviously, in some parts of the world, and okay, today here is a sunny day, but it's very notable that in the southern part of England, we've had much heavier and more regular rainfall even than normal. Whereas in other parts of the world, like South Africa, parts of Australia and California, have become increasingly arid. I mean, I was at the Australian Wine Institute Technical Conference back in July. And there's areas there where they really are struggling badly with 3 years of effectively of drought. So growers in these regions conserving as much rainfall as possible, and that could be through building reservoirs, a real priority. Um, but also then how do you manage runoff, both in order to ensure if you've got torrential rainfall that you don't lose your soils, but that also if the water is there, however rarely it might be there, that you were able to capture it. Third priority, perhaps unsurprisingly, in a year when scope 3 really kicks in, there's a real focus on carbon emissions and carbon reporting. Obviously, not all of those that we spoke to will themselves be required to report on their carbon emissions, but obviously all of them sit within supply chains that go up to big corporates, retailers and so on in North America, Europe, and the Far East, and so they will be having to report. So this is an area that is very much focused on. Another thing I think is the importance of soils, not just to healthy grapes and yields, but also to see that well-maintained soils can provide other benefits. For example, in carbon sequestration, so therefore helping the carbon emissions piece, but also in water management, so in helping the element around water management. So therefore, soils are both an end in themselves and a vehicle to other things. And then finally, there is, at least in some spaces, a focus on increased biodiversity. I mean, actually, funny enough, we were talking to a vineyard this morning in Southern Africa, in South Africa, which is, was talking about their use of cattle in the vineyard, and we were with some regenerative viticulturists in the south of England last week who were using sheep in their vineyard. But even if you're not looking just at what goes on above the ground, the focus on soils obviously means that you've got increasing biodiversity within the soil. So those seem to be the key priorities really across all of the organisations we spoke with. It wasn't, as is sometimes the case with these pieces of research, that there was sort of a bit of sporadic spread. There really was a real focus on all those five issues. Um, the other thing we started to dig into was how all of this is affecting how vineyards are being managed. And I think there were three key things that emerged here. The most important, I think, is the importance of data. That a lot of them were saying we are driven by our data. We conduct regular soil analysis, we conduct climatic measurements. So there's a real sense of we need to understand what we're facing into, and then we can take decisions on the back of that data. And then that leads through to the second point, which is targeting of inputs. I mean, historically, most farmers, be that viticulturists or indeed in any other field of agricultural activity, I think many farmers would tend to sort of equally put all the chemicals they had across the whole of their land, whether or not it was actually needed. But I think this focus on data allows there to be a much more focused use of fertilization, of other inputs, that actually it may very well be there's large chunks of vineyard that doesn't need any further input, and actually really being able to focus on where that chemical analysis says that additional support is needed, that's really the way to go. But I think the final point is this thing about experimentation, that everyone we spoke to in this piece of work was saying, we're trying this out and see if it works, and it seems to be, but we don't know. We'll try something else as well, and it could be it works this year, but it may not work next year. Or it worked last year, but it's not working this year. So very much a sense of, it's not just repeating what's been done for the last 5, 10, 20 years. It's, we're gradually facing new conditions, and we need to experiment and adjust to that as we move forward. We're also seeing quite significant changes in chemistry. And again, this is not just one or two, this was across the whole of the piece. And obviously, the main focus of this piece of work was looking at fertiliser. And a real focus is how to reduce the use of synthetic nitrogen over time. However, recognizing that there's not necessarily an easy alternative, that urea, for example, can lead to soil acidity. So it's not that there's a clear alternative. So hence that coming back to that experimentation point. Again, a move away from a blanket use of fertilizers to being more nuanced and targeted. But again, being much more dynamic and being much more aware of, okay, we might have done it last year, but there's that necessarily going to be the way forward this year. There's also, as the second point, a big focus on compost. Real sense that composting helps to build up the organic matter in the soil, and also reduce the need for synthetic fertilizers. So you get a sort of double whammy. But again, there's not necessarily an easy alternative, that some were saying they were buying in compost, and that was bringing in challenges perhaps in the way, perhaps fungi operating in the soil, or seed presence, salinity. So there's a real sense of how do we create good compost over time. But also, although the main focus of what we were doing was on fertilizer, we also saw some changes in what's going on in terms of chemical use on pest and disease management. Seeing targets to significantly reduce herbicide use, also reducing the use of pesticides, for example, by the use of integrated pest management, so using alternative techniques to manage the process, but also cultural practices, canopy management. How can you prune a canopy so as to avoid some of the challenges of mildew, for example? So seeing some significant changes across chemical use and some real focus on developing perhaps not new techniques, maybe rediscovering old techniques in order to be able to reduce the need for chemicals over time. Now, I mentioned earlier that whilst we hope this was a useful piece of work to do of its own right, we also were using it as a way of saying, how can we as SWR be valuable in collating and sharing information about viticultural practices globally? Um, for lots of grape growers, it can be a lonely business. They're often facing changing conditions. So how can we help them learn peer to peer? Also, how can we ensure that large growers have a better oversight of what their grower farmers are doing? So we launched the Sustainable Viticulture Protocol about a year ago, and it's six principles, which are down the left-hand side of this slide here. And it was interesting if you pull together the findings of this small piece of research against it, you can see that there's quite a good correlation. That on the vineyard mapping, yes, you are beginning to get a sense of you need to be data driven. You need to map where chemicals of whatever sort are or are not needed. In terms of reduction over time, solution use, chemical load. Again, the sense that over time this is something that we need to be reducing. In terms of regenerative techniques, we've talked about the use of animals in the vineyard as part of biodiversity. Started talking about the use of cover crop, IPM. There's increasing experimentation with these approaches. Not necessarily that people want to become regenerative in that it's an endpoint, but actually there's techniques here which can be valuable to them. But also a sense of, okay, as we are doing new things, how can we plan to make our vineyards more climate resilient over time? Next slide, please, Delaney. And then that's having really significant impact on those four key outcomes that we've set for the Sustainable Viticulture Protocol: soil health, water management, carbon emissions, and biodiversity. Soil health seems to be absolutely the core of what people are doing, both as an end in itself, but as a means to other ends like water management and carbon sequestration. In terms of water, fewer chemicals will obviously have benefits in terms of problems with runoff, and also better, more healthy soils. Someone just described the healthy soil as being like a chocolate sponge cake, and I think we can always that's quite a good image to have in mind. But then in biodiversity, although not everyone's focusing on that as an end in itself, the very fact of focusing on it in the soils will obviously have a beneficial effect. So a small piece of research, but nevertheless a really interesting one in drawing out some really clear themes. But I think also for our role moving forward, really valuable in saying, yes, there is a role in sharing this kind of insight, this sort of knowledge, peer-to-peer learning between wine farmers, grape farmers, in order that we can really share good practice, collectively find solutions to challenges as they emerge. And as I said, there's a large focus on experimentation, so that's a core part of the thing. So at this stage, I shall make myself scarce, and I shall pass now over to Irma Remigio, who's the sustainability coordinator for Domaine Bousquet, which is Argentinian organic wine growers, and she can introduce herself in the business. But they've been great members of ours, and we're great fans of theirs. So it's great to see you, Irma. So over to you.
Thank you, Peter. How you all doing? Let me introduce myself, a little bit of Domaine Bousquet, and then I'll tell a little bit of how we've been practicing or managing the fertilizer program, that it's actually not only called fertilizer. Okay, so Domaine Bousquet, it's in Tupungato, Yuco Valley, Mendoza. We have very sandy or sandy stony soils. So it's a very dry place with very poor, but really poor soils in this area. We have been practicing organic practices since year one, over 27 years now. We have now 172 hectares of regenerative organic certified vineyards, and of these, 162 hectares of biodynamic certified. And we have been seen some improvements in the soil carbon evolution. The last year we had an idea to compare how is the soil on the field right beside our main vineyard, the one that it's the winery. We have like a virgin camp right beside ours, and we took an analysis to see how it's been going, or how is the evolution of the soil in the last years compared to our soils, and we have doubled the carbon in the soils. It like sequestrating carbon or retaining carbon in the soil, it's a very hard thing to do in a very dry place with a very sandy, stony. So we're really proud of it. And what I'm going to say in the next slide, it is how we have been practicing and what we are looking for, or we're open to do in the next years to maybe open minds, maybe inspire or maybe attract people to do the same cause that we are trying to keep doing. So first, it's not a fertilization plan, it's a soil management plan. We do all together thinking in a more holistic kind of way. So yearly, we usually do an annual leaf analysis and also a soil test every 3 years. Now we're going to increment the soil test especially for the carbon sequestration every year. Then we do a fertilization plan guided on this analysis and some inputs and outputs. So the inputs, usually people just take into account the fertilization itself and don't count like the pruning waste that is over the vineyard, or sometimes it forgets that the water itself has a percentage of nitrogen or something like that. So we are trying to improve our, how can I say, calculation or nitrogen balance to do it more precisely and not overdo it. We have a limit to do a maximum 40 kilos of nitrogen per year per hectare. This is by Demeter Biodynamic an obligation, but we're actually trying to do it less every year. And for that, we have been doing a compost really, how can I say, a really important program. It's a very one of the biggest challenging in logistics, but also to do it in the right form. Then the weed management here, it only happens with a justification. So me with the agronomy department, we worked on this plan to make it less necessary to do, for example, inter-row cuts, and obviously the less tillage possible. So we are trying to not doing, and when we do, we have to literally just explain why we're doing and have an action plan to reduce doing it. So this is really important to permit flowering and all the biodiversity to keep seeding itself. We're also doing a really important work on cover crops. So we have every other row with cover crops to also help us to keep this biomass in a good condition to also increment our carbon in the soil. And something that we put like an obligation is to put 20% of legumes in this mix of seeds. So this is it's all things that we have been doing. We have been organic for 27 years, but for example, the biodynamic and regenerative visions came 4 years ago. So we're really new into it and into this more detailed kinds of managing, but we're pretty sure that it's working. Now, I would like to talk a little bit about the compost. That it's a very nice. This is me. So the compost we have improved and we have been putting it in a larger scale. The idea is to cover our 172 hectares yearly. For now, we can cover like every 3 years, doing like a round over it. So to do it, we have to try to import other organic waste from other industries, because in the organic department, basically all of the wineries that do organic already do composting, which is great. But it's easier maybe to bring some other how can I say, other cultivars, so with pears, with cherries that we have nearby, we can start to duplicating or triplicating it and improve it. So we really taking into account as a live metabolism. The compostation here are a biodynamic live figure. So we actually like follow up since day one, temperature, moisture. Then we need to do an analysis, microbiological and physical and chemical. So we're gonna have at the end of this compost, when we are trying to decide when to apply, if it's a young compost or a more mature compost, they need to be analyzed before first, to avoid any heavy metals, even though we bring, for example, manure for animal that have it how can I say, the permission to grazing, we need to do it. We also avoid pathogens, so we want to make sure we're not putting bad fungi or bacteria into our vineyards. Just to understand the carbon and nitrogen relationship, the organic matter, and then finally the relation between fungi and bacteria. Here we have a very dry place, so we have to irrigate. And I saw one of the difficulties someone in the paper had was the salinity of the compost. We don't have this problem, maybe also because we have to irrigate it and somehow it dilutes. Maybe that's one of the benefits of irrigation here, but we actually need to do it because without humidity, the fungi wouldn't happen here. And it's that now we are in a process of preparing ourselves to do a compost tea. That's one of the biggest challenge to this year, and we want to do it in a very how can I say, a large scale way. So I don't know if you have any tips to it. We're open to it. Nothing else. I think we have been testing also microbiological fertilizers. Which are more how can I say, focused on the bacteria fixing nitrogen, but we still don't have any how can I say, conclusions to it. I'm pretty sure it helps a lot, but once we have it, we're also going to share.
Brilliant. Irma, thank you so much. What's interesting, even a vineyard that's been doing this for 27 years still says we need to learn from other people. Um, you know, there's not an obvious right answer, and everything you've said. It's about management over time, and I think hopefully that demonstrates the value of a sort of sharing platform, which is what we're planning on doing. I think also it's also interesting from how you've been talking about things, it's sort of how you pose the question. I mean, our starting point was let's look at fertilizer. Your point was more or less actually that's a bit simplistic. You need to look at a soil management plan of which fertilization, other chemistry is a part. So I think that's helps us evolve our thinking. So anyway, thanks very much indeed, and it's
Yeah.
fascinating to actually sort of hear
I would
from the ground.
I would add it now it's also a part of our carbon emissions plans also. So now we are trying to over analysis the carbon only analysis because it's really necessary to see which practices are doing a little bit more than others and maybe focus on that also as an action plan to reduce carbon footprint.
Yeah.
So we are also doing work with a roundtable that we have here in Mendoza, which is called Vino Dinámicos. And the idea now is to do like a little benchmark of which practices that are doing are really reducing or sequestrating more carbon into the vineyards.
I think that's very important. I mean, with in a different incarnation, I worked in the development sector, and one of the things that they look at is evaluation. So, of all the things that you did, which are the ones that actually made a difference? And you often find that
Mhm.
you do 10 things, and actually it's two or three that have 95% of the impact, and that actually all the
Mhm.
others are, if not a waste of time, you can refocus away from them. So that's fascinating, man.
Exactly.
Thanks very much. It's always great to hear
Thank
from
you.
you guys. So I'm now going to pass over
Thank you.
to Ben Brown from InsectBiotech. So, BB, over to you.
Thank you. Let's go on to the next slide. That's just a bit of an intro. So InsectBiotech. So we're a company based in southern Spain. We have chosen to use black soldier fly as our insect of choice. It is a particularly useful insect because it loves to eat pretty much anything. It has a very quick growth cycle. It's robust. It doesn't carry pathogens like other insects do. So it's just overall, from a commercial insect perspective, it ticks a lot of boxes. So in terms of what we do, we've looked at using olive pomace, which is the residue that comes from the production of olive oil. In southern Spain, depending on the year, you're talking 4.5 to 5 million tonnes per year of the stuff. It basically sits around in pools. It doesn't really have a proper home. So we've managed to spend the last 2 years doing research on a pre-treatment that unlocks that olive pomace and enables our little black soldier flies to eat it. These things grow around 5,000 times from when you see them, so they're microscopic up to 150 odd millimeters. It's a 7-day growth cycle. Of that, you basically have two main products that come out of it. You have the larvae itself, which you stop before it becomes a pupae, before it becomes an adult. And then from there, you process it, turn it into a high-protein animal feeds or a pet food, which is a great replacement for fish meal, and also oil. They're quite fatty, so part of the process is to generate an oil from that, which can be used in biodiesel or indeed some types of pet food. The product that's most interesting for this discussion, though, is the insect excrement, which is called frass. If we feed, let's say, 100 kilograms of insect, around about 35 kilograms comes out as the frass. It's quite literally insect excrement. So that product itself has fascinating qualities. And if we go to the next slide, that gives us some of those qualities. So I've given the range here. This is the range across different black soldier fly companies. It's a 211 up to 336. So in the sense of nitrogen per kilogram of hectare, you're talking kind of 30 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. Ours is a 312, so 3 nitrogen, 1 phosphorus, and the 2 potassium. It's a great balance. It is a slow release organic nitrogen, neutral pH, excellent, as we've said there, for soil fertility and growth. It is really used, the use case here of frass is a base product. It's not really, we shouldn't look at frass as a replacement for synthetic fertilisers. It really is about, and going back to the slides that Peter had mentioned before, it's about the reduction. So what frass allows is a reduction of synthetic fertilisers. It increases the soil chemistry and the soil environment and brings back a bit of life to otherwise dead soils. In terms of product formats, when the frass comes out of insects as small creatures, so it's a powder, it's a tiny powder between 1 millimetre and 2 millimetres. So your standard frass, if you like, is a powder. It can be pelletized and it can be put into a liquid tea format, depending on kind of what the needs are. We're working on the fourth one, which is blending it with other types of things, with char, with bacillus, really things to balance out missing macronutrients that may be required for certain crops. So in terms of a product format, you're talking four main ones. It's blended, it's a pellet, it's a pellet, it's fine, it's liquid, and you put it with other products. Frass itself, it's not I guess we shouldn't look at this as it's this magic bullet that does all things. What it does do is it enables the plant to react better to disease and to pests. So in terms of disease resistance, it's really about triggering that plant immunity. It's shown to reduce fungal outbreaks, nematode pressures and those kind of things. A lot of research out there you will see is not winery based, it's not grape based. There's a lot of research on frass in tomatoes, potatoes, other types of crops like that. We're leading the charge to do a lot more research in grapes and vineyards. But certainly other types of crops, it has shown disease resistance capabilities. It does improve soil health, it improves structure. It improves structure because you are introducing essentially a carbon-rich product. It's a manure effect in that support. And it does, as I mentioned, improve that soil, that nutrient cycle. Pest management is a fascinating response from that. Insect frass is rich in chitin. That does have some fascinating properties outside your normal compost. Most compost, in fact, all compost wouldn't have chitin. So the chitin element does really enhance the frass's ability to be able to provide the plants some natural defense mechanism. And it does have this aim of support, which is the stimulating of beneficial fungi, which as I mentioned, which does kind of these overall improvements. So it's a product that is around stimulating the soil, which then allows the plants themselves to react better to defense. I mean, I even heard a few days ago from a winery in Portugal that they mentioned sun bleaching on their vines is improved after 3 years of using frass. So there's some interesting things coming out of this. So it's just an interesting product. So a very good product to use. And there I am. So that's us. Check us out. Happy to share research. We are starting a winery working group that will meet every few months. And the idea is to get companies like our friends in Argentina together, talk about application of frass, how it's being used, what the challenges are, what the benefits are, and really trying to improve that industry. I will say we are also working with a company in Australia who has shown some really good results by using grape pomace as a feed for insects. So there's very much an opportunity there to recycle the grape pomace, feed it to insects, and then turn it back into the frass that's fed to the vineyards. So there's a nice cyclic opportunity. Thank you.
Cheers, Ben. Thanks very much indeed. And I think one of the takeouts from that is, I mean, a bit like the point that Irma made about sophistication. It's not just about fertilization, it's about a soil management plan. In the same way, Ben, you're saying that it's not just about fertilization, it's the other things that you get out of it, disease resistant, for example. So I think So thinking three-dimensionally rather than just this thing, this chemistry does this thing. It's thinking much more holistically. Right, well, that's it from us, from our side. Just to say that the report is out. It's on our website, so go and download a copy. And thanks very much to Domaine Bousquet and the others, other wineries that kindly supported us on doing this. Obviously, you can't have data without people preparing to give it to you. So thanks very much indeed. So now we'll open the floor for questions. So if people have questions, they can either raise their hand or they can stick a question in the Q&A box, which is on the bottom of the screen. Oh, someone's just done. Irma, question for you. Compost 823 tons in 2024. How much are you planning to do large-scale composting? Do you have a specific machinery for that? Good question. How much compost are you adding per hectare year?
That's a good question. We have been applying like 8 tons per hectare per year. We're trying or looking forward to get 2,000 tons per year. We're not into it this year yet, but it's a lot of planification and also logistics. We don't have the machine, so we have to rent the machine. So it probably, to scale it, will be better having the machine, so we don't have so many costs on this how can I say, management that will need more hours to do. We actually prefer to do it with a retro. We don't really like the machines that are done to do the mix of the piles, because it usually breaks too much the hives of the fungos, the fungi. So the idea is to move less when we do all the mix and also the aeration. So the idea is to have the machine itself. It's not, it's still in the how can I say, in the prospection, but not yet done. And
It's in the planning, I think.
it's in the plan. It's in the planning, yes, for sure. But it is a cost to do it, and it takes a lot of effort and time, human time, also to do all the follow-up. But we prefer to do it ourselves, so we can make sure it's all good.
Actually, I mean, sorry, there is another question from the Q&A. I'll come to in a sec, but I just wanted to pick up on that, Irma, that one of the questions that people will always ask about doing things differently. But okay, I appreciate that you've always done it this way, but is it going to cost more to do it? We've done it this way. We all know that the wine industry is quite tight at the moment. Does it cost more to do it? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what you seem to be implying is that yes, there are costs involved, but actually that's more than made up for by the fact that you're able to be very precise about the results you can expect in the vineyard.
Yeah, it's not about only the result. For sure, for now, we're still having higher costs, but we are pretty sure that later we're gonna need less effort to do it. We're going to have how can I say, partially reduce the cost of the machine that we are planning to do, or even for the compost tea also. And this is going to lower our costs eventually, maybe in the next 5 years. And this is going to reduce our costs also on outside inputs, that we still have to do it because I'm not gonna lie, we are in a very dry place with a very poor soil, and we still need to do this fertilization. And the action plan is to reduce it at the most, not only for the fertilization itself, but also as an action plan to reduce our carbon footprint. We have set targets yearly until 2030 for our half reduction. So we must do it. This is one of our scope one biggest emission, so we have to do it. It's not something negotiable.
I think that point about not quite self-sufficiently, but less reliance on external inputs, I think is key. I mean, it's a different thing, but I live in southern England where it's been very dry this last season, and already because they've not many farmers just grow conventional pasture, they've not got enough cuts off it, so they're having to buy in haylage already, and that what you're saying is that that obviously becomes a potentially large and unmanageable or ungovernable cost. So I think that's very interesting. There's a Mr. Anonymous or Mrs. Anonymous has said, can you recycle, which I think is probably aimed at you, Ben, can you recycle grape waste into frass post-harvest, and how long does that take?
Yep. Yes is the answer. How long it takes, I mean, it really depends on our production capabilities, but essentially 7 days. So it's 14 days for the entire cycle. So we have a nursery that's available, but you would feed it the grape pomace with a few other bits just to keep the process going. But it's a 7-day cycle. So it's incredibly quick. And then from there, the sieving process is within the same day, and you would leave it for a couple of weeks in terms of you want to just compost it a bit, not apply it immediately, but you're talking like a 3-week turnaround, absolute maximum, between applying that feed and then being able to apply it to back into the vineyard.
Cool, thanks, man. Right, any more on the question front? We've got 15 minutes left if we need them. Oh, there we go. Someone's come in. Mr. Anonymous again, or Miss Anonymous. And this one's aimed towards you, Irma. Are there risks to composting at that volume for Bousquet? Any issues with bleaching and so on?
What would it be bleaching? Sorry. The idea of bleaching.
I'm not sure. I don't claim that level of viticultural knowledge.
So doing in large scale, there is a little difficulty. Is to make sure that every superfice of this compost got the temperature for the hygienic part. So we don't keep with any pathogens. Here in Mendoza, we have a plague which is called Lobesia botrana. This is a moth that actually doesn't help a lot. Here in Mendoza, there is a lot of organic producers that have been having a lot of problems with them. We only have sexual confusion and biodiversity to fight it. So in a only organic vineyard, some usually have a lot of it. When you have a mix of organic with a lot of biodiversity, with a lot of flowers, with wisps that actually fight a little bit like a biological control, it doesn't appear too much. But we also buy grapes from other growers, so we can have this problem when they bring this grape. So we have to make sure that all of the leaves that can come with the steams are going to break down and not keep applying it into our vineyards. Maybe it's the biggest challenge is to make sure the temperature gets up to 55 degrees Celsius. And that's why we all usually do rotations and move the compost. So everything that was outside the compost gets inside somewhere somehow, and then it gets the temperature elevated after that. And then the difficulty itself to apply it, it's a little bit harsh. But other than that, we have no problems.
That's interesting though about that sort of.
We haven't
challenge
had
with
problems, but we've been trying to avoid
essentially.
to propagate the plague. That's the
No,
idea.
that makes a lot of sense. We often think about the challenge of aborting grapes around sort of some of the sustainability practices. You're looking at it from very much more a biological potential challenge. Ben, you asked the question in private about how do you feed the insects, and you've pointed Pata to the InsectBiotech site. I just think it would be quite interesting just briefly just to describe
Yeah.
the cycle. It's
Yeah.
one of those things that
So
I
it,
think is
it
quite
is
interesting.
it is an environmental control system. I mean, if we were sitting on the equator where it's humid and hot all the time, you don't have that. We are in 99% of the places in the world, you don't have that. And obviously, you want to maintain an environmental control which improves your feed conversion rates and makes it economical, makes it a business case. So insects require, our range would be between 26 to 30 degrees centigrade. It requires a humidity of around about 75 to 80%. You do reduce that at day 6 and day 7. But as a consequence, you would use things like growth chambers that have a nice supply of air coming through and maintaining that temperature in a darkened room. So think of it as kind of separate chambers stacked with plastic 60 by 40 trays. We're moving into 1 metre by 1 metre trays, and the feed quite literally just gets put on top of these trays, and you dose 50,000 little things called neonates, and off they go in 7 days, eat all that. And our challenge obviously is making sure we dose the correct amount and we give them the correct amount of feed. We don't want either to be lacking. So really it's our challenge is making sure they have the right nutrition, we dose it correctly, and that environmental control system is maintained. But they're a very useful insect, as I mentioned before, because they're just so robust. They eat pretty much anything. Our challenge in Europe is also legislation on what you can and can't feed insects. They fit under the regulation of animals, and because of that, post-restaurant waste, which would be ideal, manure again would be ideal. We're not able to use it, which is why we use pre-consumed waste, pre-human consumed waste. So industrial waste like grape pomace, like olive pomace. Some companies using brewer spent grain, those kind of things. So very flexible, but yeah, it's through fairly advanced environmental control systems and sitting systems that we need to use. So that's where we spend all our money on those kind of things.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Another question which I'll answer, which is what are the trends around chemical inputs in vineyards? What are the drivers? And I think we can talk about this both in relation to the piece of work we've just done, but also the larger piece we did that we reported on last year, which was based on a much more thoroughgoing exploration of how do you reduce chemical use. I think there's a number of drivers. The first is regulatory. Particularly those growers who are not in Europe, they say that sometimes we discover that a chemical's been banned because we get fined because there's residues of it in what we sell into Europe. So there's definitely a regulatory piece, and that obviously poses a challenge because in some conditions you can end up with a situation where chemical A gets banned, but actually chemicals B and C, which need to be used together to have the same result, can actually potentially be more toxic. So there are questions both around regulation, but also is that always properly focused. And I think certainly there's a sense that a lot of the regulation within Europe, which does tend to be one of the key drivers for wine globally, is works quite well if it's being applied to Europe. But if you're applying it to other parts of the world, it's not necessarily as good. But so I think that regulatory piece is quite a complicated animal. I also think there's a cost piece. I think particularly with what we've seen around particularly fert prices, but other input chemicals over the last few years, I think there's really being a sense that if you can reduce the amount you need, there's going to be a direct cost saving. You're seeing those prices of those chemicals having risen significantly, and so being able to reduce their use is obviously going to be, from a cost basis, a good thing. I also think there's an element, which is what we were discussing before we started, that as climate change means that growing conditions are becoming more challenging, kind of in a sense in the past there was a bit of latitude, that there was a kind of bit more flexibility about what you could do and still get decent results in terms of yields and quality. But as you're getting, I mean, Irma's talked about aridity issues, as you're starting to get problems with unusual rainfall patterns or unusual heat patterns, there's a sense that there's much more, the balance is more delicate. And I think that's certainly from the research we've just been talking about today, that sense of really trying to understand that granularity, I think really is apparent. Talking to wine growers when I was in Australia a couple of months ago, real sense of, we can't just do what we've done for the last 5, 10 years. Things are changing, and they might change differently between years, and so we've got to be on the top of that, and be able to respond. I think there is also an increasing drive from retailers. I mean, I mentioned an event that we hosted at Leckford Farm, which is Waitrose being a UK retailer farm near here last week. And you're beginning to see, the Nordic monopolies, some UK and other retailers starting to say, well, we want to make requirements of the wines we buy around how they do things in viticultural terms. And a recognition that they may have to pay towards that. There's a need to share knowledge to facilitate wine growers and grape growers in doing that. That there needs to be more focus on, how can we have some metrics that would be more comparable even between very different growing conditions. So I think you've got quite a lot of differing pressures or differing dynamics, which I think is driving this. And it's not just people who, like Domaine Bousquet, have decided to grow in a particular way, in organic or biodynamic. I think we're seeing this across not just that part of the market, but also those that would see themselves as being conventional wine farmers. So I think it's industry wide. Another question on this last issue question, which I suppose is the one I just talked about. Several papers about the topic of consumer preferences. Yeah, funny enough, I've just been looking at that this afternoon with a light of sparkling wine paper. Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's a piece in the Harvard Business Review last year that talked about the extent to which Gen Z is very much more prepared to privilege sustainability issues above a brand name, and that actually is having an impact on other generations. All of which is great. The challenge, however, is how that manifests in actual procurement decisions. Actual procurement purchasing choices. And there's a piece of work done, it wasn't particularly around wine, it was around sustainability issues more generally in food and apparel. And they did it was done by Oxfam. They did a study of what people said before they went into a store about the degree to which they valued sustainability, but then actually followed through to who actually bought what. And it was something like about 89% of people said, yes, of course, I value sustainability. But when you actually looked at the baskets, only about 13% had actually privileged that as a choice. All of which is fine, but and these things have changed. But there is always going to be that difference between what people say and what they do. But I think certainly within the industry, we can use that as a real driver to make change happen. Another question, coming up, isn't it? Fungicides and pesticides are under attack on human health issues. It's clear. Showing progress to reduce must be a key for wine producers. Comment rather than question, but as you're a wine producer, Irma, I'll pass it over to you. I think it's a valuable point. Basically, the link between human health.
I would like to add a little bit more about the regulatory pushing or the, how can I say, why people are changing chemical into organic fertilizations. And I think it's not only regulatory, luckily regulations are pushing it and helping it with it, but I think like people or technicians are starting to understand or appreciate that the natural growth of the plant makes it more resilient. The walls of the cells are going to be stronger even to fight against any disease. So the idea it's really to turn it into more the way nature basically should be working. So the less we touch, the better it flows. That's a little bit something. Maybe I'm doing. I'm a philosophical way, but it actually it's observation also, doing like why the grower on my side is working so well doing just organic fertilization, and we're paying a lot of paying a lot, not only to fertilize, but then to fight all the diseases that are coming because your plants are weak. So it's a matter of also observation and of course all of the papers that have been showing the benefits of it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a point very well made, and a good one to end on. And I suppose the analogy is that, you know, that if you take care of your own body and take it to the gym and feed it decent stuff, there's less need for lots of, painkillers and all sorts of medication to put the things right that have gone wrong because you're not looking after the basic organism. So I think that sense of actually this is just to a large degree good common sense. I think that's a very good place to end because we're now on the hour. So I'd like to thank Irma and Ben very much indeed. I mean, we always say we know nothing. We rely on people like you guys who do this stuff for real in the real world, and it's always great to hear what's happening and to hear what's going on to get that kind of input. So thanks to both of you for taking the time and also to prepare your inputs for today. And thank you to everyone who's come along today. If there are questions, by all means, email us and we'll seek to get them answered. This has been recorded, so it will go on our website in the next few days. So if you or others want to listen to it, feel free to do so. But again, thanks very much and have a good rest of the day.